One message that shattered an empire. Forever, the Kareth Dominion had ruled the Orion Spur for over 12,000 years, its fleets woven through the star lanes like the threads of a golden net, catching and holding every world within reach. Civilizations bent to its will not because of the strength of its armadas alone, but because of the certainty that the Dominion was eternal. Empires rose and fell on its periphery. Barbarians raided its borders. Rogue worlds declared independence. All faded into the same outcome: Kareth victory, Kareth supremacy. That certainty began to crack on a quiet rotation in the deep communications vaults beneath the spire of governance on Vedris Prime, when a single pulse reached the Dominion's core relay. At first, the technicians thought it was a common error. A cosmic ray strike, perhaps, or the echo of some ancient signal bent back toward them by the gravity of a distant pulsar. But as the data unfolded, it became clear. This was no accident. The signal's carrier wave was unlike any in Dominion records, shifting through a pattern of modulations so complex that the Vault's AI archivist paused for nearly a full second, an eternity in processing terms, before it identified it as deliberate. The first decoded segment was short, only 6 words in a language the Dominion had never heard, carried by a voice with no identifiable species markers. Yet somehow, even without translation, the words seemed heavy, deliberate, almost familiar. The AI flagged it for immediate review by the Ministry of Information. Within an hour, the sealed message capsule sat before Minister Theros, an old and calculating figure whose career had been built on the quiet removal of dangerous ideas before they could spread. He played the message once, twice, 10 times, his long fingers drumming against the crystalline desk. The linguists reported that the voice spoke an extinct dialect reconstructed from scraps in their own archives, a dialect that should not be known to any living being. When translated, the message read, "We remember what you have forgotten." Theros dismissed the translators, sealed the vault, and began a private trace. The signal had not come from any world, station, or relay within the spur. It originated from the black between arms, a patch of space devoid of habitable systems, a place no one visited and few even charted. More disturbing still, the data packet contained layers upon layers of information beneath the 6 words: encrypted schematics, ancient star maps, fragments of long-lost historical records. It was as if the message had been designed to be irresistible, a hook baited with truths the Dominion had worked hard to bury. For centuries, the Empire's stability had depended on the careful control of its history. The official narrative, that the Dominion had been the galaxy's civilizing force since time immemorial, was the foundation of its legitimacy. But in the fragments buried within the signal, Theros glimpsed something older. Images of ruined cities on worlds the Dominion claimed to have found empty. Names of civilizations erased from the archives, and among them, one word repeated in every tongue: human. The minister considered quietly erasing the message, sealing it away in the archives. But even as he deliberated, he learned the first mistake had already been made. The message had propagated. Somehow it had bypassed the sealed security channels and inserted itself into low-priority comm streams, merchant chatter, personal transmissions, even entertainment feeds. By the time Theros ordered the communications grid shut down, the 6 words had been repeated in 1,000 systems. "We remember what you have forgotten." Traders whispered it to each other in crowded docking bays. Soldiers repeated it in barracks as a joke. But everywhere it was spoken, something shifted. Doubt, subtle and slow like a seed taking root. The Dominion's first official reaction was denial. State media declared the phrase meaningless, the product of some outer rim hoax. Yet, the more they tried to suppress it, the more it spread. Counterfeits appeared, some crude, some chillingly precise. The ministry's psychologists warned that the words tapped into a primal instinct, shared by most sapient beings: the fear of lost truth. Theros ordered the military to find the source. Scout fleets vanished into the black, their last transmissions garbled and incomplete. And then, without warning, a second pulse arrived. This one contained no words, only an image of the spire of governance itself, taken from orbit. But not as it was now. As it had been 5,000 years ago, when it was newly built, surrounded by the ruins of the city it replaced. The ruins the official history claimed had never existed. Theros stared at the image for a long time, his mind turning toward a question he had not dared ask in decades. What else had they lied about? By then, in a distant system far beyond the Dominion's reach, the originators of the message were watching. In a bunker carved into the frozen crust of a nameless moon, a small group of humans stood over a hollow table, their faces lit by the ghostly glow of the data feeds pouring in from across the spur. Every report, every intercepted transmission, told the same story. The message was doing exactly what it was meant to. And they had only just begun. The Dominion had survived rebellions before. It had weathered assassination attempts, border wars, and even the occasional planetary defection. But it had never faced an enemy that fought with words instead of weapons. In the weeks after the first and second pulses, the phrase, "We remember what you have forgotten," became a kind of contagion, mutating into dozens of languages, etched on walls in the slums of core worlds, sung in code through the back channels of smugglers' comms. The Ministry of Information deployed sensors to scrub it from every official feed, but the harder they pressed, the deeper it spread into the informal networks that had always existed beneath the Dominion's notice. Theros, who had initially believed this to be an irritation at best, now watched as entire garrison units began requesting clarification on historical anomalies referenced in the encrypted fragments. In the past, the answer would have been simple: deny, erase, replace. But the fragments were too specific, too verifiable. On worlds where the Dominion had claimed to be the first settlers, locals began digging, literally, and finding the bones of cities older than the Empire itself. The third pulse came 42 days after the first, and this time it did not bother with secrecy. It hijacked the primary broadcast network across 3 sectors, interrupting the Chancellor's annual address to display a series of short, vivid clips, battlefields littered with the wreckage of ships whose insignias had been erased from history, grand libraries burned to ash under Dominion bombardment, statues toppled by troops wearing armor with the same crest the Chancellor wore now. The images were accompanied by a voice, the same human voice from the first message, reading names, dates, and coordinates. In the great plazas of the core worlds, citizens froze mid-step, staring at public holoscreens. In the slums of outer colonies, crowds gathered to watch on black market projectors. The voice spoke for exactly 3 minutes, then the feed cut, returning to the Chancellor mid-sentence. By then, it no longer mattered what he had been saying. Behind the walls of the frozen moon bunker, the human operatives reviewed the results. Every public terminal, every private recorder had captured the broadcast. It was already being dissected, debated, and most importantly, believed. Commander Ilyas Rourke, a tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes the color of cold iron, leaned over the hollow table, scanning the data streams. "The seed's taken root," he said, "but seeds alone don't break an empire." Across from him, a woman in a dark coat nodded. "That's why we have the storm." She tapped a control, and a new set of icons appeared. The locations of key Dominion data vaults, planetary archives, and communications hubs. The plan had been in place for 20 years, ever since humanity's first scouts had confirmed the Dominion's long-term deception. The pulses were not just propaganda, they were keys, each one unlocking hidden protocols buried in the Dominions. own systems. Once all were activated, the Empire's history would be rewritten before its citizens' eyes, their lies erased and replaced with truth they could no longer deny. Back on Vedris Prime, the Council convened in secret. Military intelligence insisted the attacks were the work of a small but highly coordinated insurgency, possibly backed by one of the rival powers beyond the spur. Theros disagreed. "This is not the work of an empire," he told them. "This is the work of a people, one that has been patient, one that has been watching us." His words were met with scoffs from those who still believed the humans to be little more than an ambitious frontier race. But scoffing did not stop the fourth pulse. This one targeted the Dominion's own fleet command network. For 3 full hours, every active vessel received false orders, some harmless, some catastrophic. A patrol group in the Halvoran sector was ordered to fire on a freighter convoy. An entire battleship squadron was sent jumping into the gravity well of a gas giant, never to return. The Dominion's military command ground to a halt as officers struggled to determine which orders were real. Panic began to eat at the fringes of the Dominion's authority. Trade guilds refused to operate under the military's protection, fearing their escorts might turn on them. Outer colonies stopped transmitting tax payments, claiming communications instability. And through it all, the message remained, whispered, written, and broadcast in countless forms. "We remember what you have forgotten." In the human bunker, Rourke and his team monitored the collapse with surgical detachment. Every move had been calculated not to destroy the Dominion's infrastructure outright, but to make its people question it. Questioning led to doubt, and doubt was the first fracture in the monolith of fear that had kept the Empire together for millennia. When the time came, the final pulse would not need to fire a single shot. It would simply tip the already tilting edifice and let gravity, political, social, and moral, do the rest. It was the 91st day after the first pulse when the final signal came. By then, the Dominion was a shadow of itself. Entire, fleets had gone dark, either lost to false orders or defected to rogue governors. Tax shipments had slowed to a trickle, food shortages were sparking riots on core worlds, and every news feed, even the ones still loyal to the government, spoke in cautious tones about historical irregularities. The Chancellor had issued emergency decrees, but they only deepened the fractures, turning suspicion inward. Ministers spied on ministers, admirals purged their own crews, and still, the phrase lingered in every corner of the galaxy like an unshakable echo. "We remember what you have forgotten." No one knew what it truly meant. That was about to change. In the command vault beneath the spire of governance, Minister Theros was reviewing intelligence reports when the lights flickered. Every screen in the chamber went black. Then a single feed appeared, not from any known channel, but from everywhere at once. It showed a simple, stark scene, a chamber, much like his own, but older, cruder, lit by torches instead of crystals. 12 figures sat around a table, their features unmistakably Carith, but the robes they wore were plain, the symbols on their collars unknown to modern eyes. The recording was ancient, older than the Dominion itself. A translator's voice spoke over the static. "The fleets are gone. The humans have broken our lines. If we do not surrender, they will burn the homeworld." Theros felt the blood drain from his face. This was not a fabrication. The eyes, the voices, they were real. The Carith had been conquered once before, and it had been by humans. The feed shifted. Now it showed the ruins of cities on worlds. The Dominion claimed to have colonized. In the ruins, unmistakable carvings, human words, human faces. The voice continued. "We swore to erase them, to bury their name, to make the galaxy forget they existed, but we did not erase them all." The final image froze on the human emblem, an old, stylized Earth, its continents glowing like molten steel. Then the screen split into 1,000 smaller frames, each one showing live footage from across the Dominion. Crowds in the streets, soldiers lowering their weapons, governors stepping onto public platforms to announce their withdrawal from the Empire. The message had reached every citizen. The history they had been taught was a lie, and the ones they thought of as upstarts, as primitives, had been here before, and had beaten the Careth once already. In the frozen moon bunker, Commander Ilias, Rourke watched as the data feeds exploded with chaos. This was the tipping point needle point their long-term information warfare AI had predicted decades ago. The Dominion had not been brought down by fleet engagements or planetary invasions, but by the sudden, irrefutable knowledge that it was not invincible. Fear had been its foundation. Truth was the sledgehammer that shattered it. Rourke gave no triumphant speech. "Transmit final coordinates," he ordered. The last part of the plan was already in motion. Humanitarian fleets, escorted by small but lethal human strike groups moving into newly liberated systems. They carried food, medicine, and reconstruction drones, not soldiers. The war was over the moment the message had landed. Now came the work of making sure the Dominion never rose again. On Vadris Prime, Theros stood on the balcony of the A spire, watching the great plaza below, fill with citizens carrying banners he did not recognize. Human banners. The Chancellor was gone, fled to some unknown refuge. The council was dissolved, and above the capital, in the pale blue sky, the silhouettes of human ships hovered like silent sentinels. A single transmission reached Theros' private channel. It was the same voice from the first pulse. "We told you we remembered," it said. "Now you will too." The feed ended, leaving only silence. In the weeks that followed, the Dominion fractured into independent states. Some allied with humanity, others chose isolation. But none dared rebuild the golden net that had once ensnared the spur. The story of the message became legend, told in marketplaces and starports as a cautionary tale. Empires can fall without a single shot fired if someone knows the right words to speak. And somewhere, deep beyond the mapped stars, the descendants of those who had crafted the message began preparing for the day they might need to send another. Because in a galaxy built on power and pride, there would always be another empire to shatter.